The ink on the marriage license was still wet. It was the only thing in the room that felt real. Everything else felt like a nightmare. Clara stood in the center of the massive bedroom. She was still wearing her wedding dress. It was white, lace, beautiful, and it felt like a prison uniform. She looked at the man standing by the window, Julian Vance, her husband, a man she had met exactly 4 hours ago. A man who had paid $500,000 to her stepfather to make this happen. He hadn't looked at her once during the ceremony. He hadn't smiled when the priest told him to kiss the bride. He had just leaned in, smelled like whiskey and expensive tobacco, and he had whispered 2 words, "Don't run." Now the door was locked, the guests were gone, the champagne was warm, and Clara was alone with a stranger who owned her. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the shaking. She looked at his back, broad shoulders, a black suit that cost more than her entire education. He was staring out at the rain, watching the storm roll in over the Montana hills. Clara took a breath. A shaky, ragged breath. She had to know what he wanted. "Mr. Vance," she whispered. He didn't turn around, he just took a sip of his drink. The ice clinked against the glass. It was a sharp sound in the quiet room. "Take off the dress," he said. His voice was low. Gravel. Clara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was the moment she had been terrified of since her stepfather told her the deal. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her fingers felt numb. "I said, take off the dress, Clara." He turned around then, and for the first time she really saw his face. There was a scar running down his left cheek, old, faded, but deep. His eyes were gray, cold, empty. He looked at her like she was a piece of furniture he had just bought at an auction. "Maybe she was. Please," she said. Her voice broke. "Please don't do this." Julian set his glass down on the table. He took a step toward her, then another. He stopped inches from her face. She could feel the heat coming off him. He reached out a hand. Clara flinched. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the touch, waiting for the horror to begin, but it didn't come. Instead, she heard him sigh, a long, tired sound. "Open your eyes, Clara." She opened them. He was holding a folded pile of clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, wool socks. "Put these on," he said. "That dress looks like it's suffocating you, and I don't sleep with strangers." He tossed the clothes onto the bed. Then he walked past her, opened the bedroom door, and walked out. Clara stood there, alone in the silence. She looked at the jeans on the bed, and she realized something that terrified her even more than the marriage. She had no idea who this man was, but she was about to find out. And the truth was going to hurt a lot more than the lie. To understand why Clara was standing in a stranger's bedroom, you have to understand Frank. Frank wasn't her father. He was the mistake her mother made 3 years ago. Her mother was gone now. Cancer took her fast, but Frank stayed. And Frank liked to gamble. He liked the lights, the noise, the rush. He didn't like the losing, and he lost a lot. He lost the savings, then the car, then the house title. Clara worked 2 jobs. She waited tables at the diner in the morning. She cleaned offices at night. She was trying to keep a roof over her brother's head. Leo. He was 10. He had asthma. He needed meds, and Frank was drinking away the money for the inhalers 2 weeks ago. Frank came home with a split lip and a smile. "I fixed it," he said. He was holding a bottle of cheap wine. "Fixed what?" Clara asked. She was counting tips on the kitchen counter. $7 short for the electric bill. "The debt," Frank said. "It's gone, all of it, plus a bonus." Clara stopped counting. She looked at him. Frank never fixed anything without breaking something else. "How?" she asked. "I found you a husband," he said. Clara laughed, a nervous, short sound. "Very funny, Frank. I'm serious, Clara. He's rich. Loaded, needs a wife to secure some inheritance or business deal. I didn't ask for the details, I just asked for the check." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "You can't sell me, Frank. This isn't the dark ages." Frank's smile vanished. He leaned across the counter. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was tight. "You listen to me, girl. I owe people who don't send letters. They send guys with baseball bats. And if I don't pay by Friday, they aren't coming for me. They're coming for Leo." The name hung in the air. Leo. Clara looked at the stairs. She could hear Leo coughing in his sleep. Frank saw the look in her eyes. He knew he had one. "He's a good guy," Frank said, loosening his grip. "Name's Julian Vance. Lives up on the ridge. The Vance estate." Everyone knew the Vance estate. It was a fortress, high walls, iron gates. Nobody ever saw the owner. Rumors said he was disfigured, crazy, dangerous. "You're marrying him on Saturday," Frank said. "Pack your bags. And don't you dare ruin this, or Leo pays the price." That was the deal. $500,000 for Frank, one life sentence for Clara, now 3 days after the wedding. Clara was learning the layout of her prison. The house was beautiful in a cold, museum kind of way. Everything was clean, dustless. There were no photos, no personal touches. It was a house where a ghost lived. She rarely saw Julian. He spent his time in the study, or out on the grounds with the horses. They ate dinner at opposite ends of a 20-foot table. The silence was heavy. "Pass the salt," she would say. He would slide it down. That was it. That was their marriage. But there were cracks in his armor, tiny things. One morning, she came down to the kitchen. There was a bowl of oatmeal on the counter. Beside it was a bottle of vitamins and a fresh inhaler. "For Leo?" she asked. "I had a box sent to your stepfather's house," Julian said. He didn't look up from his newspaper. "It should last the boy 6 months. Clara stared at him. "How did you know?" "I know everything I need to know," he said. He turned the page. Clara felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me," he said sharply. "It was part of the expense." He stood up and walked out, leaving her confused. Why be kind if you're going to be cruel about it? Why buy a wife if you don't want one? She decided to find out that afternoon while Julian was out riding. She went into his office. She knew she shouldn't, but she needed answers. The room smelled like old paper and cedar. She walked to the desk. It was organized, meticulous. She opened the top drawer, nothing but pens and a checkbook. She opened the bottom drawer. There was a file, a single manila folder. It didn't have her name on it. It had a name she didn't recognize. Operation Shepherd. She opened it, and her world stopped. Inside were photos, not of Julian, of her. Photos of her waiting tables at the diner. Photos of her walking Leo to school. Photos of her visiting her mother's grave. Some of these pictures were 3 years old. He hadn't just bought her last week. He had been watching her for years. Her hands started to shake. The folder fell to the floor. Photos scattered across the rug. This wasn't a business deal. This was a stalking. She was living with a predator, and just as that thought hit her, the front door slammed shut. He was home. Clara scrambled to pick up the photos. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She shoved them back into the folder. She threw it in the drawer. She slammed it shut. She ran to the door of the study, but it was too late. Julian was standing in the hallway. He was wet from the rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked at her. He looked at the study door behind her, then he looked at her face. He knew. He didn't say a word. He just walked toward her. Clara backed up. She hit the wall. "Stay back," she warned. Her voice was high, panic rising. Julian stopped. "What were you doing in there?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. "Who are you?" she screamed. "Why do you have pictures of me? Why have you been following me?" Julian closed his eyes. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I knew this would happen," he muttered. "I told him this wouldn't work." "Told who?" Clara yelled. "Frank. Did you and Frank plan this years ago?" Julian opened his eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were sad. "Not Frank," he said. "Then who?" "Your father, Clara." Clara froze. "My father died before I was born." Julian shook his head. "No, he didn't." The world tilted on its axis. Clara slid down the wall until she hit the floor. She wrapped her arms around her knees. "You're lying," she whispered. "I wish I was," Julian said. He walked over and sat down on the floor opposite her. He didn't try to touch her. He just gave her space. "Your father was a soldier, Clara. His name was Marcus. We served together. Special ops. Places that don't exist on maps." Clara watched him, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. "He saved my life," Julian said. He pointed to the scar on his face. "I got this in a raid. I should have died. Marcus pulled me out, but he didn't make it out." Julian's voice cracked, just a little. "He died in my arms, Clara, and before he went, he made me promise." "Promise what?" He showed me a picture. A crumpled photo he kept in his helmet. "It was your mother, pregnant. He made me promise that if he didn't make it back, I would watch over you, ensure you were safe, ensure you never went hungry." Clara felt tears running down her face. "So, you're what?" "My guardian angel. I tried to be," Julian said. "I sent money for years, anonymously. I thought Frank was using it for you. I didn't know he was gambling it away until a month ago." He looked at her with intensity now. "I hired a private investigator. I found out Frank was in deep with loan sharks. I found out he was planning to sell you to a man in the city. A man who runs a ring, Clara. A bad man. The breath left Clara's body. "So you bought me first." "I outbid him," Julian corrected. "It was the only way to get you out of that house immediately, if I tried to go to the police. Frank would have hurt Leo if I tried to just give you money. Frank would have stolen it. I had to buy the debt. I had to bring you here where the walls are high and the gates are locked." Clara looked around the hallway. The cold, empty house. It wasn't a prison, it was a fortress, and he wasn't her jailer, he was her shield. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Why act like a monster?" "Because," Julian said softly, "if you hated me, it would be easier for you to leave when it was safe. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. I didn't want you to feel grateful. I'm not a husband, Clara. I'm just a soldier fulfilling a debt." He stood up. He brushed the dust off his jeans. "Frank's debt is paid," he said. "The loan sharks are gone. I handled them this morning. That's where I was." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Here." Clara took it. Inside were papers, an annulment, already signed by him, and a check, enough to start over, enough for a house for her and Leo. "You're free, Clara," he said. "You can go get your brother. You can leave tonight." He turned and walked toward the stairs. He didn't look back. Clara sat there on the floor, holding the papers. She looked at the signature, Julian Vance. She thought about the inhaler on the counter. She thought about the clothes he gave her on the wedding night. She thought about the scar on his face. He had built a cage to save a bird, and now he was opening the door. Clara stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She found a lighter in the drawer. She walked to the fireplace in the living room. She lit the fire. Then she threw the annulment papers into the flames. She watched the paper curl and turn to ash. Then she walked up the stairs. She found Julian in his room, packing a bag. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'm moving to the guest house," he said, "until you get settled. Then He stopped. He saw her hands. They were empty. "Where are the papers?" "I burned them," she said. Julian dropped the shirt he was holding. "Clara, don't be stupid. You have a chance to walk away." "I know," she said. She walked into the room. She crossed the space between them. "You kept your promise to my father," she said. "You saved my life. You saved Leo's life. But you made one mistake." "What's that?" he asked. His voice was rough. "You assumed I wanted to be saved by a check. I don't need a guardian angel, Julian. I need a partner." She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough, calloused. She traced the scar on his cheek with her thumb. He flinched, but he didn't pull away. "Frank is still out there," she said. "He's going to come back. He's going to want more money. I can't fight him alone, and I don't think you want to be alone in this big house anymore either." Julian looked at her, for the first time. The walls behind his eyes came down. He looked terrified and hopeful. "I'm broken, Clara," he whispered. "I have nightmares. I have scars. I'm not the prince in the story." "Good," she said. "I never liked fairy tales. I prefer true stories." She squeezed his hand. "So, husband, what do we do now?" Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 years. He squeezed her hand back. "Now," he said, "we go get your brother." The car ride to Frank's house was quiet. But it wasn't the heavy silence of the wedding night. It was a comfortable silence, a shared mission. When they pulled up, Frank was sitting on the porch, drinking. He saw the expensive car. He smiled. He thought he was getting another payday. He stood up as Julian got out. Julian didn't look like a rich victim today. He looked like the soldier he was. He walked up the steps. Frank held out his hand. "Julian, good to see you. How's the—" Julian didn't shake his hand. He handed Frank a single piece of paper. "What's this?" Frank asked. "A restraining order," Julian said. "And a copy of the police report I filed this morning regarding your gambling debts and extortion." Frank laughed nervously. "You can't prove anything." Julian stepped closer. He leaned in, just like he had at the altar. "I don't need to prove it to the law, Frank. I just need to prove it to the guys you owe money to. I bought your debt, Frank, which means you owe me now, and I'm calling it in." Frank's face went gray. "The deal is this," Julian said. "You leave town tonight. You never speak to Clara or Leo again. If you do, I hand this file to the district attorney, and I stop protecting you from the sharks. Do we have an understanding?" Frank looked at Clara. She was standing by the car. She wasn't looking at the ground anymore. She was looking right at him. Leo was standing next to her, holding his backpack. Frank spat on the ground. "Fine," he muttered. "Take the brats. They were expensive anyway." Julian turned his back on Frank. He walked down the stairs. He helped Leo into the back seat. He opened the door for Clara. "Let's go home," he said. Clara got in. She watched her old life disappear in the rearview mirror. The house where she was afraid, the porch where she cried. It was all gone. She looked over at Julian. His hand was resting on the gear shift. She reached out and placed her hand on top of his. He glanced at her. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It wasn't a perfect ending. They had scars to heal. They had trust to build. They had a 10-year-old boy to raise. But as they drove through the iron gates of the estate, it didn't look like a fortress anymore. It looked like a sanctuary. Clara realized that sometimes the worst moments of your life are just the twist in the plot before the best parts begin. She wasn't forced to wed a stranger. She was guided to a savior, and on that wedding night, when he told her to take off the dress, he wasn't stripping her of her dignity. He was helping her shed her past so she could finally be free.